You start with 12 former soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, a rented warehouse, and a single contract worth $2 million. Officially, you provide security services for mining operations in unstable regions. The work appears simple. A client pays for protection. You deploy personnel. The site remains secure. Everyone earns money. During the first year, the numbers look attractive. A team of 20 operators can generate more revenue in 1 month than a small civilian company produces in an entire year. Clients arrive quickly because governments, corporations, and logistics companies all face the same problem. They need protection in places where local institutions are weak. Every successful contract increases your reputation. Every successful mission attracts better personnel. You believe the system rewards competence. The company grows from 12 employees to 80. Revenue rises from $2 million to $20 million. Clients praise your efficiency. Investors approach you. Former military officers offer connections. Everything suggests that growth is a direct result of good decisions. The illusion forms slowly. You begin to believe that outcomes are determined primarily by planning, leadership, and execution. You see contracts, equipment, personnel, and profit margins. What you do not yet see is that your success depends on political stability, government tolerance, insurance providers, logistics networks, intelligence sources, and dozens of external systems operating beyond your control. At this stage, however, those dependencies remain invisible. The company appears to be a machine that grows whenever you make the right decisions. Within 3 years, the company operates in 6 countries. Revenue exceeds $100 million annually. From the outside, it looks like a security business. Internally, it functions as a complex network of contracts, logistics, and risk management. Every operator deployed requires equipment, transportation, insurance, communications infrastructure, and local permissions. A contract worth $10 million may produce only $2 million in actual profit after salaries, vehicles, fuel, training, legal costs, and security expenses are paid. The business depends on scale. To maintain profitability, you continuously seek larger contracts. Governments hire you to protect facilities. Energy companies hire you to secure pipelines. Shipping firms hire you to protect routes. Humanitarian organizations hire you to escort personnel through dangerous regions. Each client has different objectives, but all expect the same result: security without disruption. The challenge is that risk cannot be eliminated. It can only be managed. A single attack, political change, or diplomatic dispute can destroy months of planning. To reduce uncertainty, you build intelligence teams, legal departments, and regional management offices. The company becomes less dependent on individual operators and more dependent on systems. Payroll grows, compliance requirements expand, equipment inventories reach tens of millions of dollars. At the same time, success creates new limitations. Governments monitor your activities more closely, media organizations become interested. Competitors attempt to undercut your contracts. Every expansion increases revenue, but also increases exposure. The company no longer earns money by providing security alone. It earns money by maintaining a fragile balance between clients, governments, local authorities, and operational realities. You begin to understand that the business is not built on force. It is built on trust, access, and political tolerance. The problem is that these assets are far less stable than they appear on financial reports. 5 years after founding the company, your daily life no longer resembles that of a former operator. Most of your time is spent inside conference rooms, secure communications centers, and meetings with government officials, executives, and legal advisors. The company employs more than 1,000 people across multiple regions. Annual revenue approaches $500 million. What began as a security operation now functions as a multinational organization. To survive at this scale, you adapt. Decisions become increasingly data-driven. Every deployment is analyzed through cost projections, threat assessments, and probability models. Regional managers submit reports. Intelligence teams produce forecasts. Financial officers track contract profitability. Instead of thinking about individual missions, you think about systems. You begin measuring performance through metrics, incident rates, contract renewal percentages, equipment utilization, and operational efficiency. The company becomes more predictable and more profitable. As profits increase, your personal lifestyle changes as well. Private flights replace commercial travel. Dedicated advisors manage your investments. Access to senior political and corporate circles becomes normal. More importantly, your perception of risk changes. Situations that once seemed dangerous now appear manageable because the organization possesses resources capable of solving most problems. If a region becomes unstable, additional personnel can be deployed. If equipment is lost, replacements can be purchased. If a contract fails, another can often replace it. This creates a subtle psychological shift. Success reinforces the belief that every problem has a solution if enough resources are applied. The company continues expanding into higher-risk environments because those contracts offer higher margins. Clients increasingly request services in regions where governments are weak. Conflicts are active and legal frameworks are uncertain. You accept these contracts because previous expansions worked. Each successful operation strengthens confidence in the system. Yet beneath the growth, a dangerous assumption develops. You begin treating complexity as something that can always be controlled. The organization becomes stronger every year, but so does its exposure to events that no amount of planning can fully predict. A decade after founding the company, dependence becomes visible. Not dependence on weapons, vehicles, or personnel, but dependence on the system surrounding them. Revenue exceeds $1 billion annually. Thousands of employees operate across multiple continents. Entire regions rely on your company to protect critical infrastructure, supply chains, and industrial operations. From the outside, this looks like strength. Internally, it creates vulnerability. Every major contract now supports dozens of smaller contracts. Every deployment depends on transportation providers, insurance companies, intelligence partners, and government approvals. If any part of the network fails, the effects spread rapidly through the organization. The company has become too large to operate independently. At the same time, clients become dependent on you as well. Energy facilities schedule operations, assuming your teams will provide security. Logistics firms design routes based on your protection services. Governments quietly rely on your capabilities because building equivalent forces internally would require years and billions of dollars. This mutual dependence appears beneficial. It creates long-term contracts and predictable revenue. Investors view the company as stable. Banks offer favorable financing. Expansion becomes easier, yet dependence changes behavior. Reducing operations becomes difficult because thousands of jobs depend on continued growth. Rejecting contracts becomes difficult because shareholders expect increasing revenue. Entering new markets becomes easier than exiting existing ones. The company gradually shifts from choosing opportunities to requiring them. More contracts mean more personnel. More personnel require more revenue. More revenue requires larger contracts in increasingly unstable regions. The cycle feeds itself. You begin noticing that decisions are no longer driven solely by strategy. They are driven by obligations created by previous success. For years, growth felt like freedom. Now, growth is becoming a requirement. The company is no longer simply operating within the system. The system is beginning to shape the company's behavior, and once dependence reaches that level, future decisions become far more difficult than they appear on paper. The pressure does not begin with a battlefield failure. It begins with expectations. By now, the company operates in regions where governments are unstable. Elections change policies overnight, and local conflicts can disrupt entire industries. Clients still expect reliability. Investors still expect growth. Employees still expect stability. The problem is that these expectations often conflict with reality. Several governments begin tightening regulations on private military contractors. Insurance costs rise dramatically after a series of high-profile security incidents involving competitors. Some clients delay payments due to economic slowdowns. Others demand broader protection services without increasing contract values. Profit margins begin shrinking even though revenue continues growing. To maintain performance, managers push for greater efficiency. Regional directors are asked to reduce costs. Procurement teams negotiate harder with suppliers. Operations are expected to achieve the same results using fewer resources. None of these changes appear dangerous individually. Together, they create constant pressure throughout the organization. At the same time, global instability increases demand for your services. More opportunities become available than the company can realistically support. Every week, new contracts appear offering tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. Accepting them could accelerate growth. Rejecting them could allow competitors to expand. The choice seems obvious. You continue accepting contracts. Headcount grows further. New regional offices open. Additional equipment is purchased. More financing is secured. The company becomes larger than ever before. Yet internally, warning signs begin appearing. Some managers report staffing shortages. Intelligence teams identify regions where risks are increasing faster than expected. Legal advisors warn that regulatory changes could affect future operations. The reports reach your desk. You review them carefully. But after years of successful expansion, every problem still appears manageable. Pressure becomes normalized. What once felt exceptional now feels routine. And when pressure becomes routine, people stop asking whether growth is still beneficial. They begin assuming growth is the only acceptable outcome. That assumption will shape the most important decision of your career. The mistake is not reckless. In fact, it appears rational at the time. A coalition of corporate clients proposes a security contract unlike anything your company has handled before. The project spans multiple countries, protects critical infrastructure worth billions of dollars, and offers potential revenue exceeding $500 million annually. Winning the contract would strengthen your position against competitors and secure growth for years. The risks are obvious. The region is politically unstable. Several governments claim overlapping authority. Local armed groups remain active. Intelligence reports indicate that conditions could deteriorate rapidly if diplomatic negotiations fail. Your risk teams recommend caution. Some advisors suggest limiting exposure by partnering with other firms. Others recommend rejecting the contract entirely. You listen to every presentation. Then you approve the deployment. The reasoning is straightforward. The company has successfully operated in difficult environments before. Intelligence capabilities are stronger than ever. Equipment inventories are sufficient. Personnel are experienced. Financial projections show enormous upside. More importantly, declining the opportunity feels more dangerous than accepting it. Years of growth have conditioned the organization to believe that expansion is the correct response to uncertainty. Once the decision is made, resources flow into the project. Thousands of personnel are assigned. Equipment is transported across multiple regions. New logistics networks are established. Capital expenditures increase dramatically. The company becomes deeply committed before operations even begin. Initially, everything proceeds according to plan. Client satisfaction remains high. Revenue exceeds expectations. Internal reports suggest the project may become the most profitable contract in company history. Then the political environment changes. Negotiations between regional governments collapse. Local authorities begin issuing conflicting directives. Insurance providers raise premiums. Transportation routes become unreliable. None of these developments immediately threaten operations. However, they increase costs, complexity, and uncertainty simultaneously. The problem is no longer whether the contract can succeed. The problem is that the company has become too committed to retreat without enormous losses. What once appeared to be a strategic opportunity is slowly transforming into a strategic trap. And because the commitment is already so large, admitting that reality becomes increasingly difficult. The mistake is not reckless. In fact, it appears rational at the time. A coalition of corporate clients proposes a security contract unlike anything your company has handled before. The project spans multiple countries, protects critical infrastructure worth billions of dollars, and offers potential revenue exceeding $500 million annually. Winning the contract would strengthen your position against competitors and secure growth for years. The risks are obvious. The region is politically unstable. Several governments claim overlapping authority. Local armed groups remain active. Intelligence reports indicate that conditions could deteriorate rapidly if diplomatic negotiations fail. Your risk teams recommend caution. Some advisors suggest limiting exposure by partnering with other firms. Others recommend rejecting the contract entirely. You listen to every presentation, then you approve the deployment. The reasoning is straightforward. The company has successfully operated in difficult environments before. Intelligence capabilities are stronger than ever. Equipment inventories are sufficient. Personnel are experienced. Financial projections show enormous upside. More importantly, declining the opportunity feels more dangerous than accepting it. Years of growth have conditioned the organization to believe that expansion is the correct response to uncertainty. Once the decision is made, resources flow into the project. Thousands of personnel are assigned, equipment is transported across multiple regions, new logistics networks are established, capital expenditures increase dramatically. The company becomes deeply committed before operations even begin. Initially, everything proceeds according to plan. Client satisfaction remains high. Revenue exceeds expectations. Internal reports suggest the project may become the most profitable contract in company history. Then the political environment changes. Negotiations between regional governments collapse. Local authorities begin issuing conflicting directives. Insurance providers raise premiums. Transportation routes become unreliable. None of these developments immediately threaten operations. However, they increase costs, complexity, and uncertainty simultaneously. The problem is no longer whether the contract can succeed. The problem is that the company has become too committed to retreat without enormous losses. What once appeared to be a strategic opportunity is slowly transforming into a strategic trap. And because the commitment is already so large, admitting that reality becomes increasingly difficult. The instability phase begins quietly. There is no catastrophic battle, no sudden collapse, and no single event that immediately threatens the company. Instead, multiple small disruptions begin occurring at the same time. Transportation delays increase. Insurance costs rise again. Local authorities issue contradictory regulations. Several subcontractors fail to meet obligations because regional conditions have become less predictable. Individually, these problems are manageable. Together, they create operational friction across the entire contract. The most concerning development is not the increase in risk, it is the decrease in flexibility. Because the company invested heavily in the project, resources are now concentrated in one region. Personnel who could normally support other contracts remain tied to infrastructure protection. Equipment cannot be relocated without disrupting operations. Management teams spend increasing amounts of time responding to problems instead of planning future growth. Revenue remains high on paper, but profitability begins deteriorating. Clients notice delays. Regional managers request emergency budgets. Intelligence reports become more pessimistic with each update. The company starts solving problems faster than it creates value. Meanwhile, external conditions continue worsening. Political factions compete for influence. Local governments change positions repeatedly. New regulations appear with little warning. Supply routes become vulnerable to disruption. Every solution implemented by management creates additional costs elsewhere in the system. Investors begin asking difficult questions during quarterly reviews. Why are margins declining? Why are operational expenses increasing? Why is so much capital concentrated in one region? You provide reasonable explanations because each answer is technically correct. The problem is that the underlying issue is larger than any single metric. The organization is becoming unstable because its assumptions are becoming unstable. For years, planning models assumed predictable access, reliable logistics, and gradual political change. Those assumptions no longer match reality. The company remains operational, contracts remain active, revenue remains significant. From a distance, the business still appears successful. Up close, however, management is spending more time preserving the system than improving it. And when a system reaches that stage, instability is usually much closer than financial reports suggest. The moment you lose control is not the moment the system fails. It is the moment you realize that your decisions no longer determine the outcome. By now, the company is fighting problems on multiple fronts simultaneously. Governments are changing regulations faster than legal teams can adapt. Insurance providers are reducing coverage. Clients are demanding guarantees that nobody can realistically provide. Regional instability continues spreading into areas that were previously considered secure. Every morning begins with a crisis briefing. Every evening ends with unresolved issues waiting for the next day. Management remains active, but activity is no longer producing control. It is merely slowing deterioration. The most dangerous realization emerges during an executive review. Analysts present several future scenarios. In previous years, forecasts differed primarily because of management choices. Now nearly every scenario depends on external political decisions, economic conditions, and security developments beyond the company's influence. The variables you once managed have become secondary. The variables you cannot manage have become dominant. Investors begin reducing exposure. Financing becomes more expensive. Several clients quietly prepare contingency plans involving competitors. Internally, morale declines. Senior managers spend more time protecting their departments than solving organizational problems. Information flows more slowly because employees become cautious about reporting bad news. This creates blind spots at exactly the moment when leadership requires the clearest possible picture. You continue making decisions. Contracts are renegotiated. Costs are reduced. Resources are reallocated. Yet each action produces smaller results than before. The organization is still moving, still functioning, still generating revenue, but it is no longer steering its own future. The company spent years building systems designed to reduce uncertainty. What it failed to recognize is that every system eventually reaches a scale where external forces become more powerful than internal decisions. For the first time since founding the company, you understand a possibility that previously seemed impossible. The business may survive, the business may fail, and the final outcome may no longer depend primarily on you. The collapse does not arrive as a single event. It arrives as a chain reaction. A major client suspends operations after regional instability makes long-term planning impossible. Revenue from the largest contract disappears almost overnight. Investors interpret the decision as a warning rather than an isolated problem. Financing costs increase immediately. Banks demand stronger guarantees. Insurance providers reduce coverage further. Several smaller clients begin reviewing their own agreements. The issue is no longer operational performance. The issue is confidence. For years, confidence amplified growth. Now confidence accelerates decline. Once stakeholders begin questioning stability, every participant becomes more cautious. That caution spreads through the system. Equipment purchases are delayed, expansion projects are cancelled, recruitment freezes are implemented, regional offices reduce staff. Thousands of employees who spent years helping build the company suddenly face uncertainty. Internally, management shifts entirely into defensive mode. Cash preservation becomes more important than growth. Survival becomes more important than opportunity. Financial statements still show substantial assets, but liquidity becomes the central concern. Assets cannot easily be converted into cash without accepting significant losses. Contracts cannot be replaced quickly enough to offset declining revenue. The organization discovers a reality that many large institutions eventually face. Size does not guarantee resilience. In some cases, size increases vulnerability because more obligations depend on continued stability. Social consequences follow financial consequences. Relationships with investors become strained. Former supporters distance themselves. Media coverage changes tone. Stories that once celebrated expansion now focus on mistakes, risks, and failed assumptions. Employees begin leaving voluntarily. Competitors recruit experienced personnel. Confidence erodes faster than infrastructure. The most difficult consequence is psychological rather than financial. For years, success reinforced the belief that leadership, planning, and discipline could overcome almost any challenge. The collapse reveals the limits of that belief. You did not lose control because you stopped working. You lost control because the system became dependent on conditions that could not be guaranteed. And once those conditions disappeared, the structure built on top of them began collapsing under its own weight. Several years later, the company still exists, but it is fundamentally different. Revenue is lower. Operations are smaller. The organization focuses on fewer regions and fewer contracts. Many of the ambitions that once defined the business have disappeared. Surprisingly, the company is healthier because of it. The collapse forced management to examine assumptions that had gone unquestioned for years. Growth was not always strength. Scale was not always protection. Diversification was not always diversification. Many contracts that appeared independent were exposed to the same political and economic forces. Many risks that seemed manageable were manageable only while external conditions remained favorable. Looking back, the critical mistake was not accepting a difficult contract. The critical mistake was believing that previous success proved future control. Every expansion, every profitable deployment, and every successful negotiation reinforced confidence. Over time, confidence became an operating assumption rather than a conclusion supported by evidence. The company gradually stopped asking whether growth increased resilience. It focused almost entirely on whether growth increased revenue. The distinction seemed minor during expansion. It became decisive during decline. The most important lesson is not military, political, or financial. It is structural. Complex systems reward competence, but they also depend on factors beyond competence. Leadership matters, planning matters, discipline matters. Yet none of those factors eliminate dependency on larger forces. Governments change, markets change, alliances change, economic incentives change. The organizations that survive longest are usually not the organizations that expand fastest. They are the organizations that understand the limits of their influence. When you founded the company, you believed success meant controlling outcomes. After everything that happened, you understand something different. Success inside a complex system is not about achieving complete control. It is about recognizing where control ends, where uncertainty begins, and building an organization capable of surviving that reality. That lesson cost billions of dollars, thousands of difficult decisions, and more than a decade to learn. But it explains exactly how the system works.